Today I'm going to be talking about the complexity of the Spanish language. Over 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, and Spanish is just one of those languages. Although Spanish itself is usually referred to as one language, it contains many dialects. Spanish-speaking countries may share similarities, but also have distinct ways of expressing themselves through their language. They have been significantly shaped by culture, geography, as well as identity. Moreover, Chapter 2 of the textbook expresses that language connects heavily to cultural identity. Stories are a specific way for a language to grow, but a term such as the other can be presented when the beliefs or behaviors of people in different areas differ from others. Colonialism has shaped much of how the world looks like today. By 1914, Europe ruled more than 85% of the world, as expressed in Chapter 12. The 5 countries I chose to focus on are Cuba, Guatemala, Argentina, Chile, and Peru, which all have their own distinct dialects that were influenced by the mixture of indigenous, African, and European languages. Over time, the spread of Spanish has led to the decline of many indigenous languages. Starting off with Cuba, whose Spanish was heavily influenced by the Canary Islands and Andalusia, which is right here. Moreover, there isn't just one Cuban dialect, since some areas have heavy African descent and other areas have common Spanish, which again creates a separate dialect. Moving on to Guatemala, the Spanish here is thought to be slower and clearer compared to other Spanish-speaking countries. The language itself has connection to Spain Spanish and numerous Mayan and indigenous languages, which have strongly shaped slang, expressions, and vocabulary. Now to Argentina. Their Spanish was heavily influenced by indigenous languages, Spanish colonization, as well as an increase in European immigration. Just like other Spanish-speaking countries before they were colonized, Argentina had many indigenous groups that spoke different languages and performed their cultures in different ways. When the Spaniards brought their language, Spanish became increasingly more common to be spoken. And in more recent times, within the 19th and 20th century, mass amounts of European immigration occurred, especially from Italy, Spain, and France, which impacted the language heavily. Now moving on to Chile. Before colonization took place, the land inhabited people of the Mapuche tribes, which still inhabit much of the island to this day, and influence the dialect heavily. Now lastly to Peru. Peru was home to many indigenous cultures, including the Quechua, one of the 51 different groups, but colonization drastically affected their lifestyle, as many were forced to do labor. Mining, an important part of Peru's economy today, exploited indigenous and African laborers, which impacted their language heavily. Now, moving on to pronunciations, starting off with Cuba. It's known to be one of the harder dialects to understand because they tend to pronounce their R's as L's. Let us take, for example, meat, which would be usually pronounced as carne, would be carne. Words that usually would end with ADO or ADA would usually have the D removed. Let us take, for example, tired would be cansado or cansada. But for Cubans, it would be cansao or cansaa. Moving on to Guatemala, the letter X is pronounced as a sh sound, which usually connects to Mayan culture. Let us take, for example, this city in Guatemala, which is spelled Xela, would be said as Shela. Now to Argentina. Aspiration when using the letter S is common, meaning that the way it is spoken becomes softened, making the pronunciation sound more like a H. Now let us take, for example, things. Would be las cosas, but for them, it would be la cosa. The use of the double L in many Spanish-speaking countries sounds similar to a Y, but in Argentina, it is a sh sound or a j sound. Let us take, for example, llamar, to call would be llamar, but for them it would be llamar or llamar. Now looking at Chile, words that contain a ch are replaced with the English sh sound. Let us take, for example, Chile itself would be pronounced as Chile. Words that end in bon, the letter B would be dropped. Let us take, for example, lazy, which would typically be said as huevón, would be huellón. Going back to Peru, compared to other dialects, Peruvians tend to be more clear, which makes it easier for beginners to understand them. Whenever they are talking to someone informally and use tú, they tend to soften or drop any words that end with S or D. Let us take, for example, cool would be calidad, typically, but for Peruvians, it would be calidad. Now, moving on to vocab differences. A straw in Cuba would be absorbente. In Guatemala would be pajilla. In Argentina, could either be sorbete or pajita. In Chile, could be bombilla or pajita. And as you can see, Argentina and Chile are similar in that way. Then Peru would be cañita. Moving on to the next vocab word would be popcorn. Now in Cuba, it would be rositas de maíz. In Guatemala, it would be poporopo. In Argentina, it would be pochoclo or pororo. In Chile, it would be cabritas. And in Peru, it would be canchita. Now moving on to grammar differences. Moving on to Cuba. When speaking, they tend to drop the R sound in their words. Let us take, for example, a tie, which would be corbata, would be cobata. And in Guatemala, usted, which is usually used towards older individuals or people you should respect. Tú is more of a friendly manner of speaking, and vos is used with people you are very comfortable with. These three are typically used heavily in Guatemala to show how you're supposed to talk to people. If you're talking to a teacher who you just met, it is very unlikely and impolite to be referring to them as vos. Instead, you will typically use usted. Moving on to Argentina, the use of vos is more common here, instead of using tú, which is used to refer to a person. This shift of using vos instead of using usted changes the way the verb is spoken next. Take, for example, you are would be tú eres, but for Argentinians would be vos sos. Now in Chile, they tend to repeat their personal pronouns. So let us take I came to look for her would be la vine a buscar, but for them would be la vine a buscarla, which you can see that they added the la at the end of buscar. They shift the verb when using tú. Let us take, for example, to walk, tú caminas, would be tú caminai. Now, to look at Peru, just like Guatemala, it is common for them to use tú when talking to someone informally, such as a friend or sibling, while usted is used when talking to someone who should be respected. They also tend to use what is called diminutives, which are ito and ita, which add more affection. Let us take, for example, coffee would be usually said as café, but instead would be cafecito. Anthropological connection. Between many of the dialects, as mentioned in the languages chapter by John McWhorter, change occurs in language across different regions, just like many of our physical traits have. The further apart a place is, the bigger the difference in speaking, which is why Guatemala, which is in Central America, is very different from Chile, Argentina, and Peru, which are down in South America, and Cuba, that is in the Caribbean. These dialects make each of these countries different and allow them to create an image of themselves, who and where they're from in today's age. Many of these countries' dialects were influenced by settlement patterns, migration routes, geographic factors, and especially language contact. Thank you.